Hello.
Hello, Joe.
How are you tonight, Lisa?
How am I? Taking it all in, processing all of it.
Boy, there's a lot to process.
Everybody go look at the labor files, by the way. Al Jazeera. 3-parter. Very important information.
Okay, I haven't seen that, so I'm going to go look at the labor files also.
Oh, it's a good one. It's a very good one.
Who wrote it?
Al Jazeera. It's a...
yes, I know what Al Jazeera is, but who wrote it at Al Jazeera?
It's not an article. It's YouTube. 3-part series.
I see.
About what went on in the Labor Party with when Jeremy Corbyn took over and all of this you're an anti-Semite stuff.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, well, if you want to look at a co-op as sloppy and ugly and vile as it is, when you want to know what goes on inside of these things, you got to watch it. The Labor Files, out on YouTube.
I'll watch it. I will certainly watch it. Okay, we got some comments
already.
We got 2 comments. One is from Brandy and D, specifically around the world with Brandy and D. Hello, everyone. And another one,
Brandy.
Around the world with Brandy and D. Dolores here. Parenthesis D. Thank you for coming, Dolores. Thank you for being here. And we have high expectations for Around the World with Brandy and D.
I can't wait for Brandy and D. Hi, Jeff.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Thanks for sharing.
It's good to see you, Jeff.
Oh, you know something? Robert, who always comes, often is here.
Yes.
He's in Sacramento.
Yes.
He's got a school board that's been co-opted, too.
Oh, so he should have a lot to say about that.
I was kind of hoping, he can come on. He doesn't have to turn his camera on if he's camera shy and just talk to us.
He can.
He shows up.
He can. So Jeffrey Denton says he's fighting the battle for truth.
Oh, you have no idea, Jeff. I am like, I've got to calm down, figure out my strategy. But from now on, I'm letting it fly.
Fighting the battle for truth.
I'm done.
Absolutely.
Jeff saw my post earlier that said, am I supposed to pretend that I'm so confused that I beg you all to, tell me what's going on? Like it's just what's going on right now. The crazy information that's coming around. I mean, if you look at it, even if you just follow threads, it's like when you read through the thread, you can tell that both of these things just cannot be true at the same time. There's your clue.
There's your clue, all right.
It's not that hard to figure it out.
Okay, so tonight, more fiscal myths and fiscal truths. and we'll be letting it fly or letting them fly. And maybe Jeff will have some comments about that. Jeff says, I did have a really snarky, sarcastic answer to her tweet as well.
Yeah. Hi,
Okay, we'll look
Sandy.
out for that. Hi, Sandy. How are you?
Oh, whoever was going to message Robert, we're going to do that show on Thursday. No,
No, on Wednesday.
tomorrow.
Tomorrow night, right? Wednesday.
Yeah. So,
tomorrow will be the school board show.
Yeah. And you know what? There's another place, and I can't remember where, but they just actually kicked their infiltrators off of the school board, and I would love to get hooked up with somebody out. I want to say it might have been Kansas City, but I'm not sure. But there was a school board that was infiltrated, and they got them off. So I need to do some research and see if I can find somebody from out there that we can bring on too. All hands on deck with this school board stuff.
But so where was that school board?
I want to say it was in Kansas City, but please, my memory is the worst right now because I've got too many things going through my head. But there was a school board that was infiltrated with the extremism, and that school board somehow got those folks removed. And I think it was just the parents and the students pressure. I can't remember exactly. I don't think it. I can't remember exactly, but it happened like 2 weeks ago, maybe.
So we have to find out how they did it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's happening all over the country.
Yeah, and we can't just sit back. We got to get engaged.
Okay, so let's get started with part 3 of Fiscal Myths and Fiscal Truths. Our first myth for tonight: high debt levels equals fewer jobs and lower wages. And
No.
here's
high interest rates will do that.
And here's the fiscal truth. There's no historical evidence that high public debt levels even cause, quote unquote, fewer jobs. Much less do they equal fewer jobs. What that's about is, of course, to cause something is not the same thing as being the same thing as that thing. So it's not the same.
Wait. Say that again.
when something causes an effect, that doesn't mean that the cause and the effect, are equal. In other words, doesn't mean the cause and the effect are the same thing. It just means that the cause A causes some effect. Effect B.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean it's the same thing, as effect B.
Right, and quite to the contrary, right? If you're spending money into the economy as the federal government, right, then there's assets in the economy that weren't there before. Oftentimes, it is a spending in for programs or whatever it might be, but that actually creates jobs.
Yes, it can. It can very much create jobs. In fact, but depending on where you send that money, it could very easily create jobs.
Or how you propose that money that you give to the economy in whatever form you give it in is to be spent, right? Like the IRA, for example. Not that I am a fan, because we're going backwards on the climate change thing. Hello, Ian. Right?
Right.
But that's money that is going to go to energy production, right? More energy production that you are generating, the more jobs you're going to create.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, to continue with the truth, though, but there is plenty of evidence that fewer jobs precede high debt levels. Rather than causing high debt levels, they precede high debt levels. Because, of course, what happens is there are fewer jobs, the unemployment is higher, and the government will often respond by spending money to create more jobs and a
Or
greater
to, or
level.
to even to sustain unemployment because you've laid a bunch of people off on purpose,
Yes,
which is what's going to happen now.
which is what's going to happen now because they're raising the interest rates. So there's at least some likelihood that unemployment creates higher debt levels by producing increased deficit spending by the automatic stabilizers of the social safety net. Like, for example, the unemployment insurance program.
Mm-hmm.
The greater
Mm-hmm.
the level of unemployment, the more spending there is on unemployment insurance. So, unemployment insurance is one of the automatic stabilizers that kick in because we have a social safety net. However inadequate it is compared to other nations, we do have a social safety net, and that brings forth automatic stabilizer spending. So, the next myth, but that is, unless you have a further comment on that myth.
Oh, I can roll with that one. I mean, if you're going to lay people off, right? Then
Yep,
guess what starts to happen, folks? People qualify for free lunches in schools. I mean, and it just cascades from there.
it does
People,
cascade from there. And there are all kinds of automatic stabilizers, okay, in
mhm,
our economy.
people, and depending on the state you're in, if you don't have enough income coming in your house, you can qualify for Medicaid here. I mean, it just keeps going, right? And
Keeps going, and thank God it keeps going.
well, but
It-
there's another piece of that puzzle too, though. That I'm in a state where we're lucky enough that that's how our state Medicaid system is set up, right? I mean, now I can go into the fact that our state Medicaid has been privatized and all of the problems that go along with that, right? And, but healthcare, red berets, right? I have to point this stuff out. However, you put people out of work and all of these federal programs then kick in. And when you put millions of people out of work, you're going to have to start spending money.
and not only start spending money, but generally you have to deficit spend money,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which
Oh,
means
and let's also say this: if you're in a state that does not have a Medicaid expansion, right? Those people potentially don't qualify because they're on unemployment and they're considered able to find work. And those states that have an expanded Medicaid, they don't really work real hard to help you out. Okay. So we're in a vicious cycle right now. And I'm going to make this point because I just feel like I need to. You have to also remember that we have these extremists, and I'm not going to even label them in a party because they're all over the place right now. They're just wolves in sheep's clothing.
yes,
They would much rather do away with all of this. School free lunches, what do we need that for? And how come you get to get Medicaid because you got laid off? Because the first thing they're going to say is, well, there must have been something wrong with you that you were the one that got laid off, right? That's how this whole thing works. It's always coming back to pick yourself up by your bootstraps. There's something wrong with you. Nobody's allowed to get sick. You're literally not allowed to get sick. We're human. People get sick. All the railroad workers, they're literally not allowed to get sick.
Yes, I've noticed that.
This is insanity. What's
And
going on
and
here?
many more classes of workers also aren't allowed to get sick.
Well, and you know what else is happening? And it's been going on for a long time in America. People don't go to the doctor because something's wrong, but they've got to go to work and they've got to go to work. And there's never a good time to not go to work. And they only have 2 weeks off, PTO, right? Which is your sick leave and your vacation all rolled into one. We are so beaten down that, like, I just had a discussion today about a kid being sick. Well, is he really sick? Is he really sick?
Sorry, say that again.
Is he really sick? Is the child really sick? Because this is the mentality in this country, right? You're just
Yes,
supposed to get up
always
and
question.
go because it's almost like you feel guilty about being sick. Please, dear God, could we please, if we all just took back a modicum of our dignity and stood up to this crap, it would start falling away. Because I'll tell you what, this government in power right now that we've got dishing this stuff out to us, it is fragile. Now is the time for people to get out, get up, start talking,
And
start making
demand.
noise.
Yes, demand. Okay, here's the next myth. This is a really good one for the austerity mongers. They think that if you increase the public debt, if you deficit spend, in other words, and issue debt to cover the
Mhm.
deficit spending, that it means more expensive consumer credit for homes, for automobiles,
No,
student loans, as well as credit cards.
that's
So
when you raise
that's
interest
the
rates.
myth that they send out.
No, that happens when you raise interest rates. That's what's happening now.
The truth is that increasing public debt has nothing directly to do with consumer credit because the money for consumer loans, that's created out of thin air by the banks. When a bank makes a loan to somebody, that creates a deposit that did not exist before. Now, the loan proceeds do not come from a transfer of money from a mythological loanable funds market to a borrower's account. So there's no reason why the price of credit card debt ought to go up due to the government issuing and selling debt instruments. Okay, now, if you think that this is an obscure thing to say, well, in one of its economic models, the Congressional Budget Office thinks that the price of credit card debt, and the price of loans in general, um, um, uh, goes up due to the government issuing and selling debt instruments because the idea is they believe that there's a loanable funds market out there that is limited in size. So when the government issues its debt, to the private sector, they think that essentially the government is going into the private sector and is soaking up a finite amount of loanable funds that are out there. However, if government deficit spending does drive consumer demand beyond the level needed for full employment, then inflation could influence the Federal Reserve to drive up interest rates, which in turn would drive up credit card interest costs. And we are seeing that right now. It's still striking, though, to realize that the CBO, the institution that's responsible for projecting the effects of government spending and the effects, okay, of issuing debt instruments, thinks that when the government issues debt, it's in competition with private borrowers. It's shocking that,
Wait, what? Wait. What? Say that again?
okay, I certainly will. The CBO makes the assumption that when the government sells debt instruments, it's competing for a finite amount of funds that exists in a loanable funds market. That somewhere out there's a loanable funds market that people and the government all happen to borrow from. However, there is no loanable funds market because the banks are creating the deposits when they issue loans, and they create those deposits out of thin air because they have the authority to do so. This is in contradiction to the ideas we learn in school that banks take in people's savings and then they lend out the savings of people. No, that's a myth. That's a myth. Those savings stay in the savings account. When banks loan money, what they do is create that money out of thin air. The Federal Reserve does that, and all of the banks that are part of the Federal Reserve System do that. Your savings are not something that is lent out. Your savings sit there, okay, in your account, okay, and they earn interest, and they don't go anywhere.
Well, they swap. They swap them overnight.
I'm sorry?
They'll swap deposits overnight.
Well, maybe so, but they're replaced in the morning.
Mm-hmm. And they're insured.
And they're insured. Yeah.
That's
However, government deficit spending, I'll repeat that, does drive consumer demand beyond the level needed for full employment. Then inflation could influence the Federal Reserve to drive up interest rates, which in turn would drive up your credit card interest costs. And we're seeing that now. The credit card interest is going up because the Federal Reserve is raising rates rather sharply because that's the tool they have that they believe is going to control inflation. From an MMT perspective, no, that's not going to control inflation. What it's going to do is crash the economy. Because empirically, we've observed that's what actually happens. In fact, it may very well be the case that when they drive the interest rates up, that the first effect of driving the interest rates up, okay, is for the federal government to be paying out higher interest into the private sector. That, of course, is inflationary.
Yes.
And so
raising interest rates causes more inflation. Yes, we know this.
Yes.
And Stephanie Kelton knows it. So many other people.
Right. And Mike Norman knows it too. In fact, he tells us every day that that's what's happening. And he laments the fact that they're raising the interest rates. And he says that's the only thing that's going to do is completely freeze credit eventually in the economy and crash the economy as a result of that. So here's another myth. Okay, this is something the austerity mongers spread very frequently. If we do not address the federal debt now, federal investments in education, infrastructure, and research will decline. So that's the claim. Okay, that's the myth. But the truth is that neither the level of the debt, which is now at $30 trillion or roughly $30 trillion, nor the level of the debt to GDP ratio, which I suppose right now is somewhere around 125%, need affect federal investment in education, infrastructure, or research, because the federal government can always afford to buy as much of all three as it thinks is needed by the economy. On the other hand, what can reduce those investments is the irrational fear that a fiat sovereign like the United States government is subject to fiscal sustainability solvency concerns, so that it must reduce deficit spending, including spending in these three categories. So the austerity mongers are always bringing up fiscal sustainability and solvency concerns. They've been doing it for years, and they're doing it now. There was recently something from the newsletter of the Peter G. Peterson Foundation. I have that somewhere close by. Let me see if I can bring it up fast. But the title of it is instructive. Let me see if I can get this quickly here. Okay, I can't. But the title of the article, okay, I'm thinking of, specifically claimed that there was a fiscal solvency and fiscal sustainability problem. This particular article appeared just about a week ago in the newsletter of the PGPF. So they're still doing it. They're still making claims that there's a solvency problem and there's a sustainability problem for a fiscal sovereign like the United States. They still believe that. They still spread the gospel. In their newsletters, they spread it a few times a month, generally speaking.
So when you say a solvency problem, just could you please elaborate?
Sure, sure. I can elaborate. A solvency problem is specifically the government but running out of money. They're claiming there's a risk of the government actually running out of money. The title of the article I was thinking of, I did find it now, was Rising Interest Rates Threaten Washington's Solvency. This article was written by Brian Riedel, who they claim is an expert. He starts off the article by saying, over the past 2 decades, falling interest rates have saved Washington trillions of dollars on its debt payments and brought complacency regarding the escalating federal debt. An inflation rate surging to 9.1% has already begun pushing interest rates higher. And these higher interest rates threaten to bury the federal budget with damaging economic consequences.
Well, oh God.
Okay, so this is
Don't you just love it when they pull pieces that are just like, oh, please stop the federal budget? That's an arbitrary budget that's set by Congress. Oh, I can't even.
yes, I know it's infuriating. It's continually infuriating. They do this every year. Okay, they do it every year. Okay, many times per year, all kinds of articles with claims like this. And guess what? The federal government has never run out of money. The only time it even gets close is when the debt ceiling law comes into effect. And so, for a brief time, they're not able to borrow anymore until Congress raises the debt ceiling. But all that has to be done to stop them, from running out of money, is to raise the debt ceiling. And even then, that would not be enough to stop them from running out of money if the people running the federal government were willing to mint $1 trillion coin, or if Congress were willing to give the Federal Reserve orders to fill the Treasury spending account, which Congress can do, by the way, at any time. Anytime. Anyway, who is Brian Riedel? He is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, focusing on budget, tax, and economic policy. Previously, he worked for 6 years as chief economist to Senator Portman, who is now a retiring senator. In other words, this is his final term, okay, in Congress.
Mm-hmm.
Tim Ryan and J.D. Vance currently are running for his seat.
Yes.
He'll be leaving, okay, in January.
Mm-hmm.
And Brian was the staff director of the Senate Finance Subcommittee on Fiscal Responsibility and Economic Growth. So he then has a fair amount of prestige. He was important staff. He's supposedly a knowledgeable economist. In the description of this article, he was referred to as an expert. He has a bachelor's in economics and political science from the University of Wisconsin and a master's degree in public affairs from Princeton University. And yet, here he is claiming that there's a solvency and sustainability problem which the federal government has to worry about. So the point is, fiscal myths are still very much there, are very much around the city of Washington. These people are exchanging fiscal myths very, very frequently. They write, putting forth these particular fiscal myths, and they terrorize people, and they terrorize the Congress with these fiscal myths. Comment.
There's so many places that I could go with that it's almost not worth going down a rabbit hole, because the whole thing it's like Swiss cheese. It's full of holes. I have a hard time with the conflation of, specifically the conflating of the congressional budget that is set, right? We arbitrarily set a budget. And
Yep.
we don't even pass a budget in Congress of late. We just keep rolling over the budgeting process based off of prior session now.
Right.
It's
In fact, we're about
ridiculous.
to do that right now because we have a debt ceiling crisis, and they want to pass a CR which will take the government through December. And then they'll have another fiscal crisis during December, crisis, which they will then have to resolve, most probably through passing another CR, which will take them through March, okay, or April. And at that time, they'll probably finally make a compromise and decide on what their budget is going to look like. Okay, I say that because that's been the history of the last maybe 12 years in Congress.
I do.
Every few years, they have a debt ceiling crisis, and they settle it by rolling it forward 2 or 3 months, and they get through the year, uh, and they pass another CR, which runs through March, okay, or April.
So
And
when they pass the CR, Joe, what are they specifically doing?
what they're specifically doing is continuing the levels of the budget that they had previously passed. Okay, in other words, they appropriate the same rate of spending.
As they did the last session.
Yes, okay, as it's a portion, though. In other words, if they're doing it for 3 months out, then it's a portion. The same level of expenditure per month is appropriated for the same departments, for the same agencies, okay, and so on. So they get to do the same rate of spending as they did before for the next 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 months, okay, however long the CR lasts.
Okay. Lana and Shane are at the game, but they're sharing. They're in Boston.
Yeah, yes, I know they're in Boston. Okay, they went to a baseball game tonight.
So she says we are at the game. It is Tuesday. I don't think there's any football games, so my guess is baseball.
Yep, my guess is baseball too. Okay, it's also the end of the baseball season, so.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I know. I think the Red Sox are playing the Yankees in a playoff game.
Nice.
I think that's what's going on tonight.
How fun that would be.
So they get to yell and scream for either the Red Sox or the Yankees.
That would be a nice game to go to.
It would be a nice game to go to, especially for me since I'm a New Yorker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I haven't
Or
seen
I
the
was a
Yankees
New
in a long
Yorker. I
time.
haven't been a New Yorker since I was. Well, I really haven't been a New Yorker since I was maybe 17 years old or something like that. That was a long time ago.
I used to spend so much time in New York when we were 16, 17, 18. Then I went to college. And then in the late 80s and the early 90s, we were living in Philly and in and out of New York every Thursday night
Yeah.
that we could get a Friday off. We'd be up there for the weekend. We'd go all the time.
To see shows, go to restaurants, right?
We had friends up there, hang out, just go to New York, you know. You don't
You
have to,
go to the
we
village.
never went to
Go to
a
the
show.
village. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we'd go to Greenwich and we'd go through Chinatown, and my girlfriend worked for Young and Rubicam,
I see.
and her boyfriend, no, her best friend, uh, his father worked for Estee Lauder. So I mean, like we had a fun time. We were up there running around. We didn't have a lot of money, but we didn't need it because we had people who lived up there. So we just crashed with them. We had a good time.
Yep. And spend what money you had on fun things to do.
Yeah, and you get on the subway. It was cheap, and God, even cabs were cheap back then.
So more myths and truths about the burden of debt. I suppose I should say the so-called burden of debt. So here's a really popular myth. You've heard this one, I'm sure. Our grandchildren must have the heavy burden of paying off our national debt. So here's the truth. For a fiat sovereign, The only way that paying off the debt subject to the limit can be a burden for our grandchildren is if they try to pay off the debt by running budget surpluses to acquire the credits to pay down the debt. Okay, in other words, to run a budget surplus, you have to tax more than you spend.
Exactly.
So the government then is taking money out of the private sector continuously.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be a burden for our grandchildren if they sit still for that. However, they don't have to sit still for it. Uh, they can elect a Congress that will either roll over the debt rather than paying any of it down, or turn to money creation to eliminate having to issue interest bearing debt. Then they will feel no burden on their real income because of the surpluses will not be destroying any net financial assets that are in the private sector, which is another point. When the government runs surpluses, of course, as I said before, it is taking money out of the private sector. And that money is the net financial assets that exist in the private sector. Taxes destroy, or I should say, surpluses caused by taxing more than you spend destroy net financial assets in the private sector. Here's another related myth. Quote, we face a crushing burden of debt. The debt will soon eclipse our entire economy and grow to catastrophic levels in the years ahead. When I state these particular debts, and I quote them, they're quotes from actual people. Now, this myth was quoted by, in stating this myth in this way, I was quoting Paul Ryan, who used to be the Speaker of the House. He was the Republican Speaker of the House. He was the one talking about us facing a crushing burden of debt that was going to eclipse our entire economy and
Yeah.
grow to
So
catastrophic levels, okay, in the years ahead.
all that Republican speak that you hear, because you do hear this. This does come from the quote unquote red team. You hear it from the senators, but a lot from the House too. This whole, oh, we're gonna leave our grandchildren in debt and they're blah 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 blah.
Oh, but you hear it from some of the Democrats too. In other words, that was a saying
Well, Paul
that
Ryan's
was
not a
also
Democrat.
used not just by Paul Ryan, but by Barack Obama too.
Well, yeah, but that's not our Congress. That was the president, right?
That was the
He
president.
came out and trotted that garbage out,
He
okay?
did. He
Because
did.
they screwed up the financial markets big time, and everybody was in a panic, and there were walks on the banks happening, and they had to reestablish the public trust in the banking system. So they artificially pushed every big bank to shore up their balance sheet, whether they needed it or not, because they didn't want to identify the banks that were in trouble. And, basically what that was to restore the faith in the financial system. Totally unnecessary. All of that money was paid back with interest by the banks in a very short period of time. Okay. The problem really was with the loan instruments and the credit default swaps, which was a bunch of mortgages that they put derivatives around and securitized and sold them off when they were churning out subprime loans and loans that were what we used to call like specialty financing, where in a couple of years, you're automatically your payments are going to skyrocket, right? And
Absolutely.
things got way out of hand, and those securities, those mortgages started to default, and the derivatives couldn't handle the default. And it started happening more and more and more, and it got to the point where they couldn't hide it anymore.
And so the banks were facing bankruptcy. So what did the federal government do?
Bail them
But
out.
the federal government, including the Fed itself, what the Fed did was to extend $29 trillion worth of credits, but to the major banks.
They bought all those assets, put them on
Uh,
their balance sheet.
yes, it was on the Fed balance sheets, and it basically sat there until those assets were worth something again.
Rehabbed.
Yes.
But they were supposed to also, and they did, put money out there so that the banks could go and help people who were in trouble rehabilitate their mortgages.
Yes, but the banks didn't do that.
There were very few banks that did that. The bank
Very
that
few
I
banks
worked
did
for pretended that didn't happen.
that.
They didn't even want to hear when I asked the question in a corporate meeting of the CFO at the time. He like looked at me and looked over at the other patsies in the room that they all go to ask questions, and he's like, well, and totally changed the subject and addressed something entirely, like didn't even address the question. They were not going to lend money out to the poor bastard whose house was underwater that needed to be able to rehab his situation. They let the whole housing market crash. They let the whole financial sector crash. There were a lot of people that lost their jobs in that situation, and they might have been working at the banks, but I'm going to tell you right now, they weren't wealthy people. They're people that worked their rear ends off for a very long time for decent money, yeah, but they weren't the loan officers that were making money hand over fist,
No, the
right?
loan officers don't make money hand over fist.
Oh, the loan, yeah, some of them do. Some of them actually do. It depends on what your loans are. When they were cranking them out then, yes, they were. They were making money hand over fist back then. But the people that lost their jobs were the people that were, working as analysts in the banks, right?
Right.
Away you go. And they took the pensions, they took everything, everything.
They
And
took their houses.
oh, yeah. I mean, America lost so much wealth, and we still never recovered from that. Here we are, 2022. Oh, we're going to do it again.
Okay, so the myth is we face a crushing burden of debt, but the truth is the debt burden, so called, is in the form of non government net financial assets that were
Mhm.
previously spent into the economy by the government. So the government was adding assets to the private sector. It was not burdening the private sector by issuing the debt. To claim that there is a burden is just
The big
confused
ruse.
thinking. Yes, confused thinking or a big ruse, as you say.
It's a big ruse
There would
because the government, I mean, MMT is the idea that is spending money into the private sector to help the people get the money down into the micro, right? Where
well,
it is a thought.
theoretically, if you take a normative point of view, okay, on MMT, then its purpose is uh, to to clarify spending for the public purpose.
Yeah, yeah. But ultimately, the public purpose is, right? What is that? It's to make life better for the people, right?
Right.
On
Generally
the bottom
speaking,
of the macro,
right, or to put it in constitutional terms, to promote the general
general
welfare.
welfare.
It's
Hmm.
another way, okay, of saying that. It means something slightly different, but for our purposes here, it's enough to equate the two. Uh, okay, to continue, there would be a burden, however, if we tried to make the private sector pay the debt back by removing its net financial assets through excessive taxation, creating budget surpluses. So there's that thought again. So to
Well, because
avoid,
that takes the liquidity out of the capital markets, right?
well, it takes the liquidity out of people's pockets.
Well, it does. But the taxes that are getting paid in September, okay, that's not me and you.
Right, those are corporate taxes.
Hmm.
And by the way,
Hmm.
those tax bills this year were very heavy. Okay, it was a
I don't
heavy
have any
drain
problem with
on the
that. They're
private
making a shit
sector.
ton of
Mike
money.
Norman was talking about that every day. He's still amazed at how big the tax bills were. He wasn't expecting they would be as big. He was expecting a significant financial drain. But for days, he's been talking about how large the financial drain of money out of the private sector has been. And he's been waiting for it to turn around. In other words, for the fiscal flows to go positive again.
Well, because he's worried about the stock market and the bond market and all of that. And what happens when your taxes are due, right? You've got to get the liquidity to go make the payment. So
Yep.
what's happening? The trade in the markets and all of that slows down because people oftentimes have to sell their assets to come up with the cash to pay their taxes.
Right. And the
To
market
me,
goes down.
or it doesn't go anywhere. It's flat, right?
Right. But right now, I don't think it's flat. I think it's actually going down.
Well, it hasn't dipped real hard in the last several days. Okay, but what I'm trying to get at here, Joe, is the corporations have been making money hand over frickin' fist for years right now, right?
Yes, they have.
And there are some things when they sell, when companies start to sell, yeah, some things are going to dip, but they're going to come back. The thing that you got to worry about right now is housing. Well, no, let me take that back. The thing you got to worry about right now is the global instability. God only knows what's going to happen next,
Right.
right?
To the global instability. But the point is that you do have to worry about the housing bubble.
Yes, the housing bubble is a big one because that ripples through everything.
Yes.
And the housing bubble, per se, it's not really it. See, even this is convoluted now because what you've got is the interest rates go up, housing starts slow down, okay, and you get that. What they're they're saying, we're gonna lessen demand. No, they're gonna price people out of the market. That's what's happening right now, right?
Yes.
Because what ends up going on is that to get a mortgage, the rate that you're going to pay on your mortgage interest is outrageous. Okay, compared to what it's been. It's been worse in the past, but in this day and age, the rate for a mortgage right now is like wow, off the charts. What you're going to pay back in interest, if you ran the amortization table, it would shock the heck out of you. People aren't going to get loans right now. People can't get loans. Houses don't sell. Housing starts fall, right?
Yeah. New businesses don't start up.
Well, yeah, maybe. I mean, business loans are always lousy anyhow. If
Yep.
business loans were running at 11% before all this crap happened, which is ridiculous, by the way.
It is ridiculous. That's credit card interest.
Well, and not only that, but that is the consolidation, large corporations, right?
Yeah.
It's the little guy that wants to start a small business or get a small business loans paying 11. Corporations don't pay that. They're sitting on mountains of cash.
Yeah,
That's
I
why
know.
they're taxing it back.
Yes, I know. Because they had a field day during the pandemic.
Sure they did. Sure they did.
Okay, the next myth, quote, we believe the days of business as usual must come to an end. We hold to a couple of simple convictions. Endless borrowing is not a strategy. Spending cuts have to come first. So that was another Paul Ryan special.
Yeah, Paul Ryan wants everybody to work for no minimum wage. That was that whole cuckoo for crazy Cocoa Puff situation over there. We
Yes.
don't need a minimum wage. If people will work for $1 an hour, why would I have to pay them anything more? Teach them.
Right, because it's the market.
It's what the
Market
market will
that
bear.
it's what the market actually determines. Of course, the market is rigged in such a way so that the workers have no power.
Exactly.
So there it is.
Hmm.
Uh,
And
okay,
inflation will just keep wages down. That's why wages stagnated so badly in 74. And there's a lot of inputs into this, but the interest rates drove up prices and wages stagnated. Why? Well, because everybody was desperate to get a job. For God's sake, they put all the women to work.
yes,
Here we go again.
right.
Labor's out of control. We got to
After
get labor in line.
okay, and after a few years, it was it was necessary for both parents to work
Mhm.
so that a family could maybe prosper.
Yeah. Hmm.
So that was a significant change for society. It was no longer normal to have only one parent work. Okay.
Then came the latchkey kids and the gangs and everything else, right? Because nobody had any parents at home.
Yeah, right. And the immense damage done to small towns across the United States because everybody moved out to go where
Mhm.
the pay was higher.
Mhm.
And now here's the truth to correspond to that myth. Actually, endless borrowing is a viable strategy for the United States.
It
The
is.
reason why this is true is because issuing debt created to deficit spend. The process of rolling over old debt and paying interest on the debt leaves net financial assets in the private sector. Much of these new assets will be in the form of debt instruments, but these can be used as collateral to acquire bank created money or can be swapped for high powered reserves created when the Fed decides there needs to be more reserves placed into the private sector. And when it makes that happen by buying the debt instruments and spending newly created out of thin air reserves, using its reserve creation authority that was delegated to it by the Congress. By the way, that reserve creation authority delegated to it by the Congress,
Mhm.
that goes back to 1914 when the Federal Reserve was created. Alternatively, the government need not endlessly borrow as a strategy for fiscal responsibility, since, as I've explained in previous chapters, the reason why I refer to previous chapters is this is an excerpt.
Wait
Uh,
a minute. What, government borrowing? What do you mean government? I,
no, I said alternatively, the government need not endlessly borrow as a strategy for fiscal responsibility, since, as I've explained in
Oh, you're speaking to the words that they used. Okay, go ahead.
right, it can simply create the money needed to pay down the debt without burdening the economy. So, in other words, that's the response to the idea that uh, endless borrowing is not a strategy and spending cuts have to come first. No, there's no need to have the spending cuts. Okay, and endless borrowing can be a viable strategy because the level of debt before a monetary sovereign such as the United States has no bearing on sustainability. Okay, and also the ratio, uh, the ratio of the debt, okay, to GDP also has no significance for the fiscal sustainability of a monetary sovereign. That is, the power of the sovereign to create money is constant, however high the debt is, however high the debt to GDP ratio is.
Yeah, the problem comes in when you get corruption in the corporations and what they do with that money.
That is certainly a problem, but it's not a fiscal sustainability problem for the government.
No, it's not. The government's the one that, bailed everybody out and got everybody to calm down, right? We started quantitative easing on steroids at that point in time. I mean, and it worked, right? We did all of that and we had, almost sub-zero interest rates forever
Right,
because we had the resources. People were working. There were jobs, right?
right. So here are a couple of more words about this. Alternatively, the government need not endlessly borrow as a strategy for fiscal responsibility, since, as I've explained in previous chapters, it can simply create the money needed to pay down the debt without having to burden the private sector, the economy. Finally, it is also not true that spending cuts must come first. In fact, they should not come at all, since there is no reason for either deficit reduction or budget surpluses to create a healthy economy. All the United States has to do to accomplish this is to realize that there is no governmental budget constraint. That, by the way, is often referred to as a GBC, a governmental budget constraint, for purposes of fiscal solvency, and that the only constraints it needs to observe are the anticipated effects of its spending, whether it's deficit spending, okay, or otherwise. The standard for that spending and for its taxing as well must be the anticipated effects on public purpose, including full employment, price stability, reduced inequality, and the other 33 dimensions of public purpose that I've listed in another place, essentially earlier in that book. By the way, those 33 dimensions of public purpose are now up to 52 dimensions of public purpose because I've added to them over the years. The next fiscal myth: delaying action on it. Well, maybe I should say another word about that. That last little bit, okay, that I gave concerning the GBC, okay, the meaning of that, or the further meaning of that, is that to judge whether spending is likely to be good, okay, or not, what you need to do is to figure out the anticipated effects of that spending. Doesn't matter whether it's deficit spending or whether it's not actually deficit spending. You have to pay attention to the effects of the spending and evaluate the actual effects of the spending. Okay, it doesn't matter whether it raises the national debt or lowers the national debt. Okay, it doesn't matter whether it raises the debt to GDP ratio or lowers the debt to GDP ratio. Those statistics don't mean anything. What means something is the kinds of effects it has on public purpose. I mentioned some of the dimensions of public purpose here. Some of them are obvious, like price stability and full employment, inequality. But that's what you have to look at. In other words, you have to look at effects. And you should notice that when Congress goes through its evaluations now, which it does actually through the CBO, the CBO is looking at these weird statistics like the level of debt, okay, and debt to GDP ratio. It's not looking at the real effects of the spending. Okay, it doesn't evaluate the proposed spending in terms of its real effects, and that's with the CBO.
Well, it's used to make me nuts at work when I was in. I used to have to answer to the owners as the fiduciary officer, right? And they were all hung up on these KPIs, key performance indicators, right?
Right.
And that's what Joe's talking about when you talk about debt to GDP. That's a KPI, okay? It's a key performance indicator. The problem is that half the people in the room didn't know what the hell the key performance indicator was actually telling them.
With respect to that used as a KPI by the CBO, that's not significant as a KPI because it has nothing to do with fiscal sustainability.
Exactly. It's kind of like when I had a billing. I had different segments of the state that we were billing, right? And one segment of the state would have a turnover on, you bill, and then by the time you get paid, this one of my sectors would go 14 days, and the other one might take 6 weeks. And this one over here that takes 6 weeks, that's a problem.
Yeah, it wasn't a problem at all, right?
It was actually the good one. Okay. It was the one that, the underwriters that we were billing over there, the market mix of my payer sources over there, Medicare paid every 30 days. Okay. You bill, and then the turnaround, and it was like a 30-day cycle, right?
Yeah.
And when they paid really well. The place over here that was turning around every 2 weeks, we weren't even getting half of what we were getting from Medicare for the services that we were providing. But in the boardroom, man, this biller over here has got a problem. What's going on over here?
Yeah.
Do you own this business? I thought you did. It's made me nuts. So that's the problem with KPIs. The people that you're talking to have oftentimes think they know everything, and they don't. They don't.
Yep. They're going through drills that don't really mean anything.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and at the governmental level, the CBO is doing that too. That's why we have to change what the CBO actually does. So the next myth is specifically delaying action on the national debt means it will be much more difficult to protect Medicare and Social Security from abrupt, severe, and widespread cuts in the future on all beneficiaries. And the truth is, that's the myth. The truth is, action on the national debt, other than to repeal the debt limit isn't necessary at this time. As just stated, all we need to do is keep deficit spending to achieve public purpose and to keep issuing debt instruments in one-to-one correspondence with that spending. It would be wonderful if we could manage the political problem of debt issuance by using platinum coin seniorage to pay down the debt and to deficit spend, because then it would be far easier for Congress to pass fiscal policies in line with public purpose. But this isn't necessary for fiscal sustainability. For that, all we need to do is to eliminate the debt ceiling so the executive branch can spend its mandates, which were appropriated by the Congress. And then, of course, we will need to get Congress to use its deficit spending authority to work for the public purpose, because, of course, mostly Congress doesn't use its deficit spending authority to work for the public purpose. It uses its deficit spending authority to do things like supporting the war in Ukraine.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah, there's always money for the things that, like, the people have no say in. Notice that? Like, we don't vote on whether or not we're going off to do a, I don't know, NATO interaction with some country that blah, 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 this, that, and the other thing.
There's already
They used to have to come ask the American people whether or not we were going to get into a conflict with another country. And if Congress voted it down, they didn't go.
Yep. And since the Second World War, okay, I can't remember a time that the Congress actually declared war.
I don't.
It's the only branch of government that has the constitutional authority to declare war. It hasn't declared war since World War II.
Well, you notice that we call it the Vietnam War, but it was actually a police action.
Yes, it was actually a
It
police
was
action.
never a war
Right.
because we didn't vote on it.
Was the Korean War.
Well, wait a minute. Didn't they vote on the invasion of Iraq? They did.
They voted on the, yeah, but what they passed was an authorization to use military force. They never declared war.
Why? Why would they? Why did they do it that way? Was it because of the way that they changed?
From my point of view, it was because it was mainly for PR reasons. They didn't want to call it a war.
What are you talking about? They called it a war from day one.
Yeah, they called it a war from day one, but not technically speaking.
Oh,
They never made a declaration of war. I mean, they do silly things like the debt ceiling itself. No, the debt ceiling itself. It would take them an afternoon to repeal the debt ceiling law, and then they wouldn't have these debt ceiling crises every 2 years or something like that. I mean, they go through all kinds of angst when it comes to the debt ceiling crises.
Oh, well, it's just a big show.
They want the big show. That's it. They want to have the big show.
And, the funniest part about it is that wait, this is important. Bernie threatened Joe Manchin with shutting down the government if we passed that thing. What the hell did they call that thing he wanted to do? Special something something for the IRA thing?
It was special permitting, I think.
Right. So Bernie threatened him with shutting down the government, and guess what Joe Manchin did today?
He finally backed off.
He pulled it.
He finally.
Hey, you guys, look, hardball works.
The reason why hardball worked, okay, in that instance was because in that bill, there were certain authorities Joe Manchin wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so in the end, he wanted that bill to be passed, and that's why he backed off. Okay, and the next category of myths: myths and truths about the government, family, or household. Okay, in fact, I think I'm going to leave this for next time. We've already gone through a lot of myths and truths. So let's start looking at comments and see what people have to say. Okay,
There's not a whole lot. There's some, but not a lot.
maybe there'll be more when we start to answer some of the comments, some of the questions. Let's see. Now, there weren't a lot of comments at first. There was a comment from Shane having a wonderful vacation at the Red Sox Orioles game with Lana now started a few hours ago. So I guess it wasn't the playoffs yet. It was just the end of the regular season because they were playing the Yankees a couple of days ago. Now they're playing the Orioles. So
Mm.
uh, there weren't many early comments. Forward movement. What happened to that young person who used to come on?
I think he was looking for Ezra.
Okay, if you're looking for Ezra, Ezra is going to be on Thursday night when we have the Dump the Incumbents program. And Jeffrey Denton says something about the globalists. He says maybe that's why it's taking the globalist class hundreds of years to quote on everything on Earth because literally everything they do backfires and they have to come up with a different plan. Now, that's a pretty good point, Jeff. Jeff says, yep, and if you literally question anything about it, especially the official establishment narrative, there are several supposedly completely random people who savagely attack you for even questioning. Yeah, we've been seeing a lot of that lately.
Bots everywhere.
Bots everywhere, savage attacks everywhere. There's somebody online right now trying to attack the job guarantee. He asks questions, he or she asks some questions. The questions are then answered by some of the MMTers, on the job guarantee. Okay. And then he says, you haven't answered my question. He keeps coming back with, you haven't answered my question. I think the MMTers involved, for some reason, of feeling that this is a valuable conversation that they're having with him, but I can't imagine why. Steve
Yeah,
Roth,
I'm not into having any more MMT. Don't let people pull you down into the swill. It's not worth it. There's enough of a MMT consciousness now out here now that you don't need to engage with people who just want you to engage and disassociate, because people don't like it when you go back and forth with trolls. Nobody reads that. All
I
it does
know
is
they
tie
don't.
you up.
I know they don't. So Jeff says, Jeff Denton, that is, and the oligarchs work together so they have no competition. Of course, they have no competition. Sandy Degg says, I remember them calling it a police action. Yeah, so do I.
Mm-hmm.
A police action because they didn't want to call it a war. And maybe
Yeah.
because it was going through the UN. I'm talking about the Korean War.
Uh-huh.
And so maybe the UN didn't want to have it seem as though they were going to war. So they called it a police action.
Well, I mean, that's kind of what ended up happening with NATO and all these treaties and everything. It's like people have obligations now, right? You have obligations, although we can renege on those things. That nearly any point in time, apparently. But you have these obligations to your allies or to comply to the agreements that have been made. And so Congress got usurped in a lot of ways. And it doesn't look like that's coming back anytime soon.
Yeah, and they've allowed themselves. They've allowed the executive branch to actually usurp the congressional authority. Okay, I believe that's happened because Congress doesn't want the responsibility. It's related to things like their failure to repeal the debt ceiling laws. I started to say a while ago. They can do that at any time, okay, in less than an afternoon, much less than an afternoon. But neither party wants to take the responsibility for repealing the debt ceiling law because they're afraid of the ads, that are going to come.
The ads are going to come whether they're ready for them or not. They always do. That's crap. These people are in cahoots together. Sorry, I can't hold my tongue anymore.
I don't want you to hold your tongue. I mean, I think they're in cahoots together too. But what I'm saying is, it's been quite clear for some time that they do not have to have the debt ceiling crisis. Sometimes the debt ceiling crisis have hurt the Democrats politically, but a lot of times they've hurt the Republicans too because it's backfired.
It's a cudgel. Again, they throw the
Yes,
American people under the bus so that
but
they
it's a
can score
cudgel.
political points.
Okay, but it's a cudgel they don't have to have.
Well, and I think that the American people have gone through enough heartache over the last 20 years already that it's they actually are like the emperor without any clothes on. They literally think that people can't see what's going on. There's
Yeah,
a
but we can't.
lot of people that have their eyes wide open. Now we need to start opening our mouths, and I'm going to lead the way.
We have to start to open our mouths. We also have to realize, with respect to the debt ceiling specifically, how trivial it is.
No,
If
all they
they
do is
were,
throw people out of work. Their paychecks
if
stop.
they were to repeal the debt ceiling and end the debt ceiling crisis, what kind of blowback would they get? I mean, they would not get any significant blowback. The public would hardly notice it.
Well, the Republican fringe would make a lot of hay out of it, and
No,
the
they'd
old
make a lot of
guard
noise about it.
leadership.
What I'm saying is, I don't think they would make any hay out of it.
You know,
The only thing the Democrats would have to say is, look, we're having another debt ceiling crisis. We have it every 2 years. Everything is paralyzed every 2 years. It's stupid because we always end up raising the debt ceiling anyway. So nothing happens because nobody is willing to deny to the government of the authority to issue debt instruments. Even the private business sector wants these debt instruments. They want to buy them because they need a risk-free investment. So they don't want us to stop selling debt instruments to them.
yeah, but what in the world would Rick Scott and the rest of them talk about every time they get to the microphone? I mean, my gosh, they wouldn't even know what to say, Joe. They'd probably have to start talking about recipes.
Exactly. That's exactly why they should get rid of the debt ceiling.
Yeah, if they had half of a political brain,
If
but
they
they
had half,
don't.
that's the problem. They don't have half of. They're getting excited about something that's not important at all, and they're imagining threats to their position uh, if they should go forward and repeal the debt ceiling law. It's just rank stupidity. Jeff says, I have been watching Shane and Lana's exploits, and I hope Teresa is feeling better.
Have they been tweeting? Because I haven't seen it.
Teresa had a little too much to drink yesterday, and she tripped and fell and hurt her hip.
Oh, that's awful.
Yes. Okay, it was. Okay. Shane called. I guess it was either uh, either last night or Sunday night, and said hello. Lana said hello, and Teresa said hello too.
Well, that's good.
So she was feeling well enough, sufficiently well to say hello, but they were still in the bar. So maybe that's why she was feeling sufficiently well to say hello.
No, but I mean, okay, so, but they haven't, like, posted pictures, or have they?
They posted some pictures on Facebook tonight.
And I don't do Facebook. Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, I saw a picture of Terrence Cudney with Shane. Okay, and Lana was on the other end of the camera.
Okay.
Okay, so we did see that. Okay, folks, I think we're about done. We'll be back tomorrow with a very interesting episode on the crises we're having in local school boards all over the country. Okay, but Lisa is living through such a crisis and
Yeah.
can talk about it firsthand. And we may find also some other people who are going through similar crises that we'll be
Yeah.
able to call on.
I'd really like to have Robert on. I got to get a hold of him.
Yeah, so would I. I have him on my Twitter.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can DM him and tell him we're talking about this.
And then I'll look up and see where the other school is that actually got the board members off the board. And if we can get a hold of them, or at least just get a bunch of information about how they did it, I'm sure it's out there.
Okay, that would be really good to know. And so Dee says, from the Around the World with Brandy and Dee accounts, Dee says, thank you for a great conversation. Thank you very much, Dee, for sharing and for being here tonight. And everyone else, thank you for coming, okay, as well. And we will see you tomorrow night. And we're going to have a lot of fun tomorrow night. It won't be quite as dry as Fiscal Myths and Fiscal Truths.
Oh, come on. I don't think we were that dry, were we?
I don't know. I tried not to be that dry, but it's like...
Well, our audience could tell us if we were dry.
Yeah, were we dry tonight? Sandy says, I'll be interested in hearing about that. My husband used to be on the school board in our town. Okay, I think that's before the dark money came in, though, Sandy. And what we'll be talking about but tomorrow is dark money funding extremist candidates.
Yeah, that's really what the segue is.
Have a great night. Thank you, Joe.
Sandy says, not dry.
Not dry. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy.
Were you having a cocktail while watching?
Who, me? Sandy.
No, Sandy.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe they all need cocktails when they watch us. Who knows?
Yes. Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
I see you have a big libation there, Lisa.
It's iced tea, and I took the dog in here and let him lay on the dog bed next to me because he is starting to come into being like going into puberty. And like, I've done this before. It's like they're perfect. They're trained. Everything's going so well. And then the teenage hormones kick in and it's like a 180. And that's where I'm at right now. Like, oh, I'm starting all over again. But he has the attention span of a gnat. But he's a good dog. Anyhow, love everybody.
Okay, we love you, people.
Bye, Bonnie. Bye, Bonnie.
Tomorrow.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Night, Lisa.
Good night.